Thank you, ladies and gentlemen, for being here and to listen to what we have to say. I want to start off by putting down a rumor. I think it's exactly a year ago that there was a raid into Pakistan and they supposedly got Osama bin Laden. And we never saw any pictures of it. And of course, they threw his body in the ocean. We didn't see pictures of that either. And there are some people who wonder if he's really dead. But I want to put that rumor to rest because I know now that he is dead. His name is on the voting list in Chicago. I want to talk about inflation and money and so forth, and we'll start off with a cartoon. I think this is about 20, 25 years old. I think you see this in the newspapers every once in a while, the Wizard of Id. And they're screaming at the king and they're saying, the wizard, well, what are you going to do about inflation? And he said, print more money. We can't do that, sir. Why not? There's no more gold to back it up. And the wizard says, phew, for a moment I thought we were out of paper. Isn't that the way things are going these days, right? All right, now here's a $20 bill. You've all seen these and you know what it is. And you go through a litany of what we've had for currency in our country. We used to have gold certificates issued by the Treasury. We used to have silver certificates issued by the Treasury. And then we went to this and to that and so forth. Now we're down to Federal Reserve notes that are issued by the Federal Reserve. And it doesn't say anything on it about gold or silver. It doesn't say anything about value. All right? There's a law that says that these Federal Reserve notes shall be redeemed in lawful money. Now you got to stop and think about that. It's the law says that they should be redeemed in lawful money, and if they're redeemable in lawful money, then they are not lawful money themselves. Right? So there's an admission there, and it used to say that on that, but they got rid of that. But that's what the law says, shall be redeemed in lawful money. Therefore, it's not lawful money. Right? Now it also says that this note shall be legal tender for all debts, public and private. All right, what does legal tender mean? Legal tender means that the law says that you've got to accept this as money. All right? And it's not needed if the Federal Reserve notes were dollars. You wouldn't need a legal tender. Everybody would know. Right? And the Federal Reserve notes happen at this point to exist as a monopoly. They are the only thing that is designated as legal tender. Right? And if you start to issue some kind of currency yourself, you will probably be visited by somebody from the Treasury Department or the FBI or whatever. So we see that the money we use is, first of all, as we've already said, it's not lawful money. What it is a note. All right? Now, what's a note? Well, if you've ever written an IOU, it's a note. Right? Is it money itself? No. It's something that says you can go and get the money if you have to. And so this is a Federal Reserve note. Are we being deceived? Are we being lied to? Are we being taken down a primrose path? Absolutely. Okay. But there is a definition of the dollar. The dollar is 371.25 grains of silver. We don't use the term grains anymore, but so many grains, it's 400 and some odd, add up to 1 ounce. Right? So a grain of silver is a very tiny thing. But this was in the Mint Act of 1792. It's never been repealed. A dollar is defined as silver. Right? And from that, you can get what you want to call gold. What's the relationship gold to silver? And it shouldn't be decided by government. It should be decided by the marketplace. Okay. Now go to the U.S. Constitution. It says Congress shall have power to coin money, regulate the value thereof, and a foreign coin, and fix a standard of weights and measures. Okay. What does that mean? Well, Congress shall have power to coin money. You don't coin paper. Right? Right? Coin money. All right? Regulate the value thereof. Now, that power was to say that if you have Spanish mill dollars and you have pieces of 8 and you have some other kind of currency floating around, as they did when the Constitution was written, then you would have somebody say that each of those is worth so much versus the US dollar, right? And there was a standard set, right? And fixed the standard of weights and measures. In other words, 12 inches to a foot and so many feet to a mile and so on and so on. So that was good. And it was because of that law that our country began to take off, right? Now, I want to stress this. The Constitution says you have the power to coin money. It does not give the federal government the power to issue money, right? So what is the U.S. Congress supposed to do? Well, it's supposed to run a mint, take the people's precious metals, silver, gold, and coin them and stamp them into a fixed size, weight, and purity, and that's the coinage, right? That's the power that was given, and that's all the power that was given, right? So it has the power to coin money, not to issue money. I hear a lot of people when I talk about this subject, they say, well, we got to get back to the government issuing the money, not the Federal Reserve. No. We don't want the government doing that either, right? There's no power, right? If you trust government, maybe you'd want that, but a lot of people don't. Now, it also says in the Constitution, no state shall coin money, emit bills of credit, make anything but gold and silver coin a tender in payment of debts. You got to realize that the jealous guardians of state sovereignty were there at the Constitutional Convention, and they freely gave up their powers in this regard, which was surprising because they were very jealous guardians of state powers. They said they still accepted prohibition against issuing money and even coining money. They wanted it to be one kind of coinage in the country, and that was going to be done by the Federal Mint, which was started in 1792, right after the Constitution was accepted. It also says no bills of credit. Bills of credit was the term used for paper money, right? They didn't like the idea of paper money, right? If you're as old as I am or older, you may recall the phrase, something was not worth a continental, right? They weren't talking about the automobile. They were talking about the fact that during the Continental Congress, there was an issuance of paper money that turned out to be absolutely valueless. And it gave rise to that phrase. I can remember my parents and grandparents using that term. Oh, that's not worth a continental. And I'm not sure they even knew what they meant, what it meant by it. All right? And then they say only gold and silver are recognized, right? Well, states gave up those powers. All right, now, here's a headline from the New York Times in 2008, just as we were entering into this malaise and it said, U.S. plans $800 billion in lending to ease the crisis. Now, I've highlighted over there a little piece of red, and what it says is they would print as much money as needed, right? And they did. They printed the money, right? Now, less than a year later, we were still in the fix, so the New York Times came out with another headline, front page again, Fed will inject $1 trillion more to aid economy. And again, I've highlighted and blown it up here, and it says, as a way of getting more dollars into the economy, a tactic that amounts to creating vast new sums of money out of thin air. Right? Now, what happens when all of this money is created and put into the system? Your dollars become less valuable. Right? That's how they take on value. And so inflation is thievery. It's always been thievery, and it can also destroy a country. An interesting sidelight to this is that these two articles, both appearing on the front page, are written by the same guy, Edmund L. Andrews, who no longer works for the New York Times. I guess he was too truthful for them. Right? All right, now let's clear up something else here too. What is wealth? People talk about somebody's wealthy because he has a pile of stocks and bonds and paper certificates and all, he's very wealthy. You know? Well, that's a manifestation of wealth. Wealth is productivity. Wealth is when you take the raw materials of the earth and you fashion them into goods that people need and people want. That's wealth, right? So wealth is manufacturing, and it's mining, and it's agriculture. It's producing things, right? But how many people realize that? Too many people want to think of wealth as something else. No. What has happened to the wealth producers in the United States of America over the last two or three decades? Right? Gone way down, hasn't it? Right? I can remember reading as much as 5 or 8 years ago, that the number of people in the manufacturing business had gone from 19 to 13 million, the number of people in manufacturing, and it was continuing to shrink. Where did those jobs go? Where did that manufacturing capability go? Well, it went to Mexico, and then it went to China, and it goes every place that you can possibly. I actually bought a shirt from the Marine Corps recently, a thing with a little Marine Corps emblem on it. And I was absolutely aghast when I looked at the label. It was made in Vietnam. Right? A lot of Marines died in Vietnam. Right? Here now they're buying shirts from them, right? So keep in mind that wealth is productivity, and who destroys productivity, who destroys the people's capability of producing? Government, right? All right, now here's a current national debt clock. This was 27th of April, 2012. What's that, 4 or 5 days ago? Right? They admit to $15 trillion of indebtedness. Now that doesn't count the unfunded obligations, Social Security, Medicare, Medicaid, so on. If you added those to this, you'd be $100 trillion, right? An incomprehensible amount of money, right? It says that the estimated population of the United States is 312 million, and therefore every citizen's share of this 15 trillion is $49,991. You all owe that much, and so does a little baby just born into this country. All right, so I want you all to get it up before you leave here today. Right? The national debt has continued to increase an average of $3.96 billion per day. Per day. Right? This is incredible. I mean, you talk about suicide, here it is. Now, what is 1 trillion? Well, 1 trillion is 1 and 12 zeros, right? Or it's 100 billion, or it's 1,000 million, or it's 100,000, it's 1,000,000, right? It's just incomprehensible, right? To even know what you're talking about here. Now, in order to solve the problems that we have in the recession that we've gone through here, President Obama selected an economic team. These three gentlemen were the original economic team. Timothy Geithner of the Council on Foreign Relations, Treasury Secretary, and Lawrence Summers, CFR member, Director of National Economic Council, and Paul Volcker, CFR member, Chairman of the Economic Recovery Advisory Board. Right? So these are the best minds that Obama could come up with, or somebody told Obama to come up with. And these are the people who started to get us out of the recession. Well, we're not out of the recession, but some of them are out of their jobs now. They've walked away. Summers isn't there anymore. Volcker isn't there anymore. Volcker, incidentally, is the man who, when he was the head of the Fed, way back in the late 70s, he was confirmed to it. He told the senators the standard of living of the American people has to go down. I don't think you're going to escape that. And I remember reading that, and I said, well, thank you very much, Mr. Volcker. Thank you very much. I appreciate that. Right. All right, so what did these three guys decide? Well, they should have looked to Japan. And if they had looked to Japan, they would have seen that Japan's bubble had burst. Japan was at one point riding high. They even bought Rockefeller Center. They bought golf courses out on the West Coast. A lot of people remember that. But what happened to Japan? Well, they were operating on a bubble, and their bubble burst. So they had 10 fiscal stimulus packages to try and get out of it, right? They increased the money supply. They cut interest rates. They had public works spending. They had bailouts of corporations, and they designated some companies too big to fail, okay? Well, ladies and gentlemen, that was 20 years ago, and Japan is still in the recession, right? So there's a lesson there that didn't seem to be learned. Still, 20 years later, Japan's still in the recession. What did our leaders do? What did Geithner, Summers, and Volcker do? Exactly what Japan had done. And the results here in America are no better than what happened in Japan. Right? And we're still in the recession and so forth. Now, here's a chart that shows the national debt after the particular man had become president and then finished his term. So at the end of the Carter term, the national debt was not even 1 trillion, just close. Right? After the Reagan term, it was 2.6 trillion. Right? I can remember in the early days of the Reagan, we started a program called No Trillion Dollar Debt. Don't go beyond the $1 trillion mark. Well, we did that in the first year of the Reagan administration, and of course Reagan is looked upon as the great savior, the great conservative, and so forth. And I always admired the rhetoric, but the performance was not a match for the rhetoric, right? So then we go to George Bush Sr., and we see at the end of his 4-year term, we're up to 4.1 trillion. And then Clinton had 8 years in office, and the national debt didn't rise as much as you might have expected. And it didn't. It went to 5.6. So then his son, second Bush, came in, and after his 8 years, we're now up to the $10 trillion mark. And after Obama's only 3 years in office, we're up to 15 trillion and climbing, right? And that's only 3 years. Are we going to get 8 years of Obama, or are we going to get just 4 years of Obama? That remains to be seen. And it also depends on whether or not anybody can find his birth certificate, I suppose. I don't know. All right. Debt relative to the gross domestic product. Now, this is a good way to measure the debt. We see that in the Carter years, the debt was 33% of the gross domestic product. And it rose under Reagan, it rose under Bush, it went down slightly under Clinton. It went up again dramatically in Bush 2, and then Obama is, when I put this chart together, it was 99.7. In other words, we owed as much as we produce in a single year. Right? And no country has ever survived that. Right? This is not good news. Right? Since I put this chart together, they've gone over the 100%. We now have debt that exceeds the gross domestic product of the United States of America. Right? All right, the Obama budget for fiscal 2013 has been published, right? And it's $3.8 trillion. That's what they want to spend in a single year, right? And the Obama budget for that same fiscal year talks about 2.5 trillion in receipts. What are receipts? Well, it's the taxes, the various kinds of taxes that are paid. Your personal income tax, and then there's corporate tax and excise tax and a few other minor little taxes, right? So if you put the two together, you 3.8 trillion that they're going to spend and 2.5 trillion that they get in receipts, you see that there's a deficit of 1.3 trillion. Now, whenever they publish this deficit, it always goes up. So it's going to be more than that when we finally get through fiscal 2013. So is the situation getting any better? Obviously not. The situation is getting dramatically worse, right? The Obama budget for fiscal 2013. Interest and mandatory spending exceeds receipts. Now, what am I saying here? Well, mandatory spending is entitlements. Right? Mandatory spending is Social Security, Medicare, pensions of federal employees, pensions of military, and so forth. And the amount of interest and mandatory spending exceeds what they take in government every year. Well, why do they need more money? Well, they have programs that they shouldn't have, obviously. We see that because of the United States indebtedness, that the U.S. bond rating was lowered from the AAA category, which is the highest it's ever given. And the first time in the history of our country that U.S. bonds are no longer AAA. They're a little bit less than that. What do they call it? 2A plus or something like that? What is it, right? You know?
It might be AA, A minus, or
double A plus. All right. Now, if you've been watching the newspapers or the television recently, you've seen that Greece has had a lot of economic troubles. And Greek bonds are considered junk, right? They're not AAA, they're not AA, they're not even A. They're now considered junk, right? But the U.S. debt is 32 times the amount of Greek debt, 32 times larger. And what am I saying here? I'm saying expect that the rating of the U.S. bond is going to sink even more, and soon. Okay, let's solve the problem. How are we going to solve the problem? Well, here's some of the suggestions. Raise taxes 50%, cut entitlements, right? Cut the size of federal programs. That one I'd go along with, right? Repudiate debts. There are people saying, well, just repudiate debts, all right? So if you're holding a U.S. government bond, you might find out someday that whoever has this in mind and succeeds at it is going to say, well, your bond is worth nothing anymore. Now, we have a Republican plan to address this. It's put out by a Wisconsin congressman named Ryan, right? And the Republican plan still calls for $1 trillion deficit. It does not call for a balanced budget for into the 2020s or 30s. I've forgotten the figure. But in other words, well, why are you playing around with this? Why don't you do what needs to be done to take care of this problem, right? All right. So a bad solution is being recommended. And the bad solution is United Nations to the rescue, right? With the International Monetary Fund issuing currency. And forget the dollars, forget the Greek drachma, whatever else they have over there, forget it, you know, even forget the euro. We're going to have international money. And this is being discussed more and more, and it would be absolutely the wrong thing to do. Okay. All right, so what's needed? Now, I put Ron Paul up there because this is what he has said. This is what he would do. Abolish unconstitutional departments and programs. Abolish the legal tender law, right? Why abolish that? So that people could start using something else instead of Federal Reserve notes for money. Restate the dollar's definition, 371.25 grains of silver. Allow private coinage. Now, whenever I say that, there's always somebody who said, well, if you allow private coinage, there's going to be somebody start a mint, and instead of giving you a 1-ounce silver coin, he's going to give you a coin that has some base metal in it, and he's cheating you. I say, okay, that could happen, right? And if it does happen, what's your recourse? Take them to the courts. Sue them. Sue them for fraud. That's what the courts are for. And people say, well, you know, we just don't want that to happen. I say, well, you want to stay where we are? I mean, you're talking about one person here or one person there being defrauded by a guy who's putting out the coins that aren't what they say they are, right? So some people might be defrauded, but you stay where we are, everybody's being defrauded, right? Everybody's being defrauded by the Federal Reserve, right? And Ron Paul even says that if you start doing this in a short time, we'll be able to get back to sensible and you can cancel the income tax. Would that be a welcome thing to happen? Yeah. A little bit, yeah. A little bit, yeah. Now, the whole business here of what needs to be done and what's being stated by so many of these political leaders and so forth it's just an abomination, all right? All right, so here we find a very healthy development. We see states are taking action, right? Now, no state can coin money. That's what the Constitution says. But in Utah, they have come out with a law, and they have said that no more taxation on gold and silver being used as money. Right? We're not coining the money. We're simply saying that in our state, gold and silver can be used as legal tender. Right? And it's got the federal guys up in a little bit of a tizzy. They don't like this idea. They don't want any competition. They want to have total monopoly over the money. All right? We see in South Carolina, the House of Representatives in that state of South Carolina has just okayed gold and silver as money. Right? They're not coining it. They're prohibited by the Constitution for coining money. And 10 other states are moving this very same way. This is what I think should be done. Right? It should be done not just in Utah or South Carolina or these 10 other states. It should be done everywhere. Right? And of course, you need the legal tender law. Now, no taxation on gold and silver. What has happened is the feds, in order to try and slow this down, have said that if you buy gold coins or if you buy silver coins or something like that, you've got to pay a sales tax. You're trading in your paper dollars for something of value, and you've got to pay a sales tax on it, right? So what they're saying is no taxation on gold and silver in the state of Utah. Good for them, right? And that kind of thing has to spread, that kind of attitude. Okay, now, I've given you a lot of bad news, right? Is there any good news, right? There is. There's good news. The plan for victory. This is the John Birch Society's plan for victory. We start off by realizing that we take our country back through the House of Representatives. I don't think it's realistic to expect to steal the presidency, although I would love to see it happen, right? And you know what I'm talking about, right? So the Constitution of the United States, Article 1, Section 7, says all bills for raising revenues shall originate in the House of Representatives. Okay. So if the House of Representatives will not fund a bill to, will not put together a bill to fund foreign aid, is there anything the Senate can do about it? No. The President? No. The Supreme Court? No. The power of the purse is in the House of Representatives, right? And a lot of the representatives we have don't even realize what power they have according to the Constitution. So all bills for raising revenue shall originate in the House. I went to, I was talking to a 4-year-old recently, and I said, if you're heavily in debt, should you give away money? I'm thinking of a foreign aid program, you know? And he said, no, of course not. I said, well, how'd you like to run for Congress? It makes so much sense. We still have and I tried recently to find out how much foreign aid is costing the American taxpayers. And ladies and gentlemen, I couldn't come up with a figure. There's so many programs, and there's so many things that they don't call foreign aid that really are foreign aid that I just couldn't come up with a figure. Okay? All right, so here's the solution. We take our country back through the House. Now, Robert Welch, the man who founded the John Birch Society, would frequently say, withdraw the United States from the United Nations and you will have broken the back of the insider control conspiracy against civilization. Right? Right? Okay, we're getting close. Right? There is hope. Right? It has always been understood that refusal to pay dues to the UN means you want to withdraw, or you'll be kicked out, or something like that. So we see that over recent years, there have been some votes in Congress. In 1997, there was an actual vote to withdraw from the United Nations, and only 54 members of Congress supported it. There are 435 in the Congress, in the House, and therefore you need 218 for a majority. 218 is the magic figure, right? In 1999, there were 74 votes to cease funding, and some of the people who were very pro-UN at the United Nations, well, that means you want to get out of the United Nations. And somebody said, yeah, that's right. That's what I want, right? In 2003, there were 74 votes to cease funding. In 2004, there were 83 votes to cease funding. And in 2001, a little more than a year ago, February 18th it was, 2011, there was a vote in the Congress to cease funding, in other words, a vote to get us out. Now you see we've progressed here to 83, so I want you all to decide in your own head, don't have to scream out numbers, how many do you think voted for this in February of last year? All right, you all got a number? All right, here's the answer. 177 voted yes on H.R. 1, February 18th of 2011. Now, if you read the New American, you'd find that in the Freedom Index issue that was put out in the summer of 2011, and it's item number 2, one of the House votes, all right, introduced by a congressman named Paul Braun from Georgia, who spoke at one of our council dinners when we were down in Atlanta not too long ago. All right. So, is there hope? All right. Ladies and gentlemen, we could stop this whole business. If there's enough in the House that are willing to say no funding for the UN, those same people would say, okay, let's get rid of the legal tender law. Let's do this, let's do that, and so forth. So that's what we want to see happen. And here is something that I love to see. I had the privilege of seeing this in the flesh. This is a billboard, and it's halfway between Tucson and Phoenix in Arizona. Get us out of the United Nations. That would, as Robert Welch has said so many times, it would break the back of the conspiracy. Not only UN related, but everything else. If we could get out of the UN, we'd be buying time to take care of a lot of other problems that we have. All right? And ladies and gentlemen, that's it. Thank you very much.